Order, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag's right there.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so this is the Policy Committee of the Board of Education. We have from our legal counsel, you can introduce yourself.
Jeremy Motz with Clark Hill.
And we have our Superintendent, Dr. Tuttle, Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Bishop. I'm the Chair of the Policy Committee, Valarie St. John. We have Trustee Laura Hall, and then Trustee or Board President Clint Derringer is going to be sitting in for now because two of our trustees did not want to participate in the committee process. So I was kind of doing double duty there for a while. So we can get right into it unless there are any concerns about the agenda. All right, so the first thing that we have is the web and app privacy policy discussion because our website has been updated and there's also going to be an app associated with it. And I've been informed that this is just an FYI. We don't have to approve it. It's just so that we can see what people are going to be agreeing to when they log on to our website or download the app.
Yes, that's correct. This one is not governed by board policies, but it is a standalone acknowledgement that we have on our website. So on our website now, we have on the final site, which is the name of our new web site company. But we also want to make sure for transparency purposes, but also making sure that people know where their data is going, the consent, the cookies in which their computer would have on them when they do certain things on our website. We're looking to be able to make sure that they acknowledge this when they come to our website. So although Final Site has one, we feel like it's important for us to be able to have one. That way people know when they're on our site that they are safe.
Okay. Any questions or concerns about the website privacy policy?
Okay, one question. Is there some specific reference at all about the app portion of the web and app privacy policy? Are there apps that are in scope? Are there apps that are out of scope? Is it even necessary to clarify that?
I think there's going to be a dedicated app, right?
Yeah, from our understanding, we're talking about the app. There's like a portion of it like on your phone. That's like a Final Site app. So like any other app you would go to, like just like let's say for instance our students when they visit everyday math apps, like that's not referencing within this policy. It's just within the Final Site app that you have on your phone when you're going through and doing anything that is Grosse Pointe Public School related.
Okay, what about Schoology as an app?
This one does not go over Schoology as an app.
It does not.
No, it's just for our own internal website.
So we don't have the app portion live yet, right?
The app portion part, I have to check with Rebecca Fannin, but I don't believe that part has been rolled out.
Okay.
I believe what they have right now is the native app in which you can have, like if you want to on your phone, like you can, a shortcut in which you can go to on your phone, but I have to double check with her on that piece. I don't have it on my phone yet if we do have it.
Yeah, I don't either.
So like for as Derringer, like we do reference in here with third party. So like Schoology, like some of the data, transparency website, the link that you have on your website. So like if you go to your website and then click into one of those that takes you to a third party, then this references those third parties they would have their own privacy, policy and how you use those. But we're not it's clearly we're not selling data to any of them. We have agreements with them on how all your data would be maintained.
Is the parent portal, student portal considered sub to the website, or is that a separate third party?
That's a great question. I have to double check into that one, but I believe that is separate from this website, Final Site.
Okay. I mean, that's where we get close to Schoology as an app, but the information is all driven by the portal that is really, really close to internal to the website.
Yeah,
again, I don't even know whether there's any value in clarifying this, but it was really the only question that I had as I read the policy.
Sure. That's a good question because you do log into the parent portal through the GPPSS website.
But you log into MyStar after that, so you're logging into their system at that point, right? So that would be a separate company that has.
I can confirm those as far as like what do we consider to be a site that's ran by Grosse Pointe Public School System in which we kind of own versus what our third party sites. So it's not like we have like a list of third party sites and determine like which one we talk about the links and third parties in here, which one it references and doesn't reference. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we got Parent Portal, MyStar, in particular.
Schoology.
Schoology. And if you can think of any other ones, just send me an email and I'll make sure.
Like everything they log into Clever with, those are all third parties.
Mhm.
So that, I don't think that would fall under the, like my
But we can
understanding.
double check and
Yeah.
make sure. We want to make sure we're keeping kids safe. So
Mhm.
I think being clear is being kind.
That's, of course, assuming students are reading the privacy policy when they log in, which I doubt they are. But good to have it for legal compliance. Any other questions about the privacy policy? And that's not something we need to approve or bring to the board for approval, although I imagine it would be included in a Friday communication in the future once you have all the
Sure.
all the language set in stone. All right, so next item is a discussion about external contributions and legal compliance. Specifically, we're looking at the current board policies 6.04 and 8.05 because they don't align. One says that all grants have to be approved by the board, and then one says that the superintendent is authorized to accept gifts, not grants, but I mean, that seems very similar, so we'd like to align those, and then we wanted to get some legal counsel about what is allowed as far as soliciting contributions and whether we should restrict some of those to ensure neutrality of the district, I guess.
For sure. I definitely appreciate that. And Mr. Motz here is prepared to be to talk about those things throughout our district in which we do receive funding for. So if you want to give us an update on what you kind of discovered or learned or things you're looking at.
So generally, school districts have the ability under a couple different acts, even the revised school code, to accept donations and gifts. So that is something you have the power to do. Now, gifts can be given from many different types of entities, individuals, estates, companies, corporations. We'll get to your comment on the two different policies, and we'll make a comment on the grants versus the gifts, because there is a pretty big distinction between those, and we can align them, but they will need to be different. But generally with accepting gifts, really it comes down to, and one of the questions I was asked is, what entities, and specifically, could get into the area where you might be, is it prohibited or is it allowed? And some of those, like other political organizations, is something that often gets looked at. So that was one of the questions that I was charged with taking a look at. So two of the main ones that political organizations that often have money that can donate are, political organizations can be a lot of different. It can be a committee, it can be an association, it can be some type of a fund. Those are all as defined under the Federal Internal Revenue Code as a political organization. Some of those even expanded to, the bigger or more common term is like a PAC or a political action committee. But there's also what I can also sometimes call a quasi-political organization, and that one would potentially be like a 501c4. So not to be confused with a 501c3, which is a charitable organization, nonprofit, but a 501c4 is also a nonprofit under the Internal Revenue Code. However, the reason I call it a quasi-political organization is while 501c4 is also commonly known as a community benefit, or welfare, community welfare organization. So it's really for like the benefit of the community. That's what the primary purpose has to be. But the rules do allow for them, as long as it's not the primary focus, they can do some political lobbying and things like that. But both of those entities can give donations to school districts. There's nothing that legally prohibits them from doing that, so they can do that. And then there's also nothing under federal law or state law that would prohibit a school district from accepting, a donation from those types of entities. Now, one thing that comes in, because if these entities are political organizations or quasi-political organizations, of what they sometimes do, obviously that sometimes brings into the school district's Michigan Campaign Finance Act. But school districts, they can accept a donation. So provided that the donation from one of these entities is not for a singular person benefit or is not restricted in a way that must be used for something that the school district can't do, the district can accept it. One of the things that a school district couldn't accept a donation if it was restricted for political lobbying, because under the Michigan Campaign Finance Act, school districts can inform about a bond proposal or a sinking fund proposal or other ballot issue. They can have objective information, but it can't advocate. That's sort of the informed but can't advocate on the Michigan Campaign Finance. So those are the things we look at as sort of those sort of parameters when you're coming to donations. Now, other things can come into play as whether or not you want to, because if a political organization is making sizable donations to a school district, sometimes that can bring in the issue of whether or not they're trying to influence something, and that could be even if a company, whether it was political or not, a company's trying to, make a large donation to school district, is it trying to influence something? So those are all considerations. But at the end of the day, the board can make a decision to accept or reject any donation. So if the board wants to have policy in place that would put, guardrails or other restrictions on what it can or cannot accept money from or for benefit for, it can always do that and up to your policy. And so that brings me to sort of the 8.5 versus 6.5. So 8.5 right now talks about that this district can, and of course it follows the law, can accept these gifts, bequests, and things of that nature. And then the superintendent's authorized to accept them, but there are some restrictions. Like one of the examples is like if it's too costly to implement. So if somebody says, we're donating this money for a new baseball field, that comes off like because they might bring in Title IX implications. Now we have to put in a new softball field, that we don't have money for that. So we don't want to accept that because we have other restrictions. So those are the types of things that the policy already has that. So if we wanted to expand 8.5 to do that, to maybe look at different things, we could. Now 6.5 is really for grants. So grants is really like federal grants that are coming in, which could be like, whether it's Title I, technically, your food service money is a grant from the USDA and under law. So those types of things. And that's where the board would accept those. And, if the board wants to have gifts be accepted, we can adjust that as well. That's 8.5, but 6.5 and 8.5 are really for different things. So they don't have to align exactly. But you can adjust any of those to address things that may, concern. So I'll stop there and we can open up for any questions.
I'm glad you delineated between grants and gifts, because I think a lot of times we've been using them interchangeably. For example, some local nonprofits run a grant cycle that they have their own process for soliciting the grant applications from teachers and then awarding them. So would that not technically be a grant? Should we be calling that a gift?
No, that would, if you're applying for it,
Okay.
That would be more like, it's not like a lot of times there could be grants. So the teachers may apply for a grant, and that you could change that if it's a teacher grant that could be approved by the superintendent. Maybe it doesn't have to come to the board, because sometimes teachers might get a couple $1,000s, and it's limited to like maybe it's just buying supplies or they buy supplies. Some of the bigger grants at 6.5 is looking at is more of those monster, grants that you're going after, that the board would have to accept a lot of conditions for the school district to operate. Like the DNR may give a grant to improve one of your buildings because it has wetlands on it. Then you're stuck with having to maintain that building in a certain manner for a period of years. So those are probably the ones. But if you teacher grants, you could probably do it. That would be different than a gift, where somebody is coming and saying, "Hey, we have all this money. We want to donate it to you for X."
Great. So maybe defining it more as if the grant requires installation, additional staffing, et cetera, that would be something that the board has to approve or can't come from certain entities.
Yeah.
Whereas gifts that are just money for teacher use as needed, that would be different.
Yes.
So if either of you have any questions or concerns about that, just so you know, I'm not thinking of revising the policy and putting it forward at the next board meeting, because this is a little complex and I want to make sure our administration has time to go back and think about our discussion, and if they realize that whatever we come up with would exclude a certain funding source that they rely on, then they'll come back to us at the next policy committee meeting and say, hey, if you say it like that, we're going to lose, reading counselors or whatever.
I think having them as two separate things does make sense. I know there was discussion, at least my understanding was to combine them, but having that explanation of grants being really a different entity, I think is important to distinguish between those two things, because we even have like small grants that come from the credit union and things like that the board's not approving, but like those are gifts for a specific purpose that a staff member, doesn't have to be a teacher really, but a staff member is applying for. So I like keeping them separate would be my input. And I think we do need to look at what some of the political organizations, whether our funding sources are coming from that or not, and how we're defining that and what would be appropriate and what wouldn't be.
In terms of clarification, a grant means that there was an application process. Was there anything else in that definition that was key?
Generally, that's what we think of, you know, if you're asking, like you're applying. Now, there are some just kind of general grants that you might get as a school district in general for, you know, being the entity that you are, that you might not officially apply for, but they do come as a grant. But most of it's where you're seeking to get that money as opposed to somebody coming to you and saying, I want to give you this money.
Okay, so right now, I just paraphrasing from my own understanding to make sure I've got it. We're talking about keeping two separate policy statements, one 604, one 805, and one would govern grants and the other would govern the rest, gifts, bequests, and donations.
Yep.
So that I agree with what I've heard to this point. I think that is certainly useful. Perhaps that definition of grant somehow included in the appropriate section, whether that's probably 6.04 because it's in the title, so that we don't have to ask and answer that same question again in the future.
Would we take the word grant out of 8.05 at that point then?
Yeah, because it does say gifts, grants,
Right.
the question, and that's, I think that's where the confusion really is. I agree, we definitely strike that.
But then if we're gonna discuss the second part of that, talking about organizations, does that language then need to be under the grant funding? Because if we're only defining a grant as something that has an application process,
I think probably both.
it would need to be defined in both cases.
Well, the gifts, bequests, and donations does seem to be restricted to members of the public, decedents' estates, or corporate entities, which would, by my reading of the policy, exclude political organizations, even 501c4s. It would just be.
But the grant's
seems
more like, it doesn't limit that here, is that what? In 604.
Well, but I'm saying if 805 is already restricted, then
Got
I
it.
need to restrict 604.
Right.
I thought that was interesting that it was already.
I don't think that's necessarily limiting to what you can do, but you could definitely, you know, expand upon that if you wanted to consider, like, these are the only things or areas we can accept money from. But in that, I think we more want to put general parameters, not just say we're only going to accept it from this type of an organization, because that might inadvertently exclude something else that would be around. So I think we could look at clarifying that to both, one, put more clarity on the types of entities that, you know, or other issues that we could raise that would, you know, maybe call out information that maybe from something you might not want to get a gift from. If the money's tied to some other organization, you could do that. I think it would be better than saying, well, we're only going to accept it from these 10 types of organizations. I think we can put like different parameters right now where it's going to add undue burden on the district, you know, expenses and things like that. We can put those type of parameters that would then the board could use those to determine whether or not. I think that would be giving you guys more flexibility long term.
That's definitely something that we want.
Is anybody aware of where the language referring to policy 7230 came from? An email that was kind of regarding
Policy 7230.
7230, a 4-digit number, which stood out as strange to me because our policy manual is in, you know, 8.05 or 6.04. Not sure where policy 7230 came from in that email from Pointers for Academic Excellence that we got just after the new year.
Oh, I can't say that I read that very carefully, so I don't know what they're referring to with policy 7230. I don't know if it's right.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Let
know
me see
that.
if I can find it.
I'm looking up because I know what it is. I just want to make sure before I say something that so 70. I was 98% sure, so I just looked it up. 7230 is Neola, which is the Neola policy manual. That's the that was, I believe, you guys had before you switched to Clark Hill. 7230 is Neola's policy on grants or gifts, bequests, and donations.
Oh, so they were just referencing an outdated
So is
manual?
that no
So it's either-
longer,
Yeah, so it's either referencing an outdated manual, or they were referencing something they found, by searching for these types of policies on the web, and that came across 7230 under Neola's policy deck.
That's true. It probably could be found if you Googled like GPPSS, but because
Yeah.
we have a lot of old documents
In
still
the
up
archives or
on the
something,
web
yeah.
in, I don't really
Yeah.
understand how
Mm-hmm.
the
They
website
might have
works, but
found something like an old archive or something
Yeah.
that came up.
Even on our last website before we updated, you could find things that go back to the 60s
Mhm.
on there. So, but Neola policies, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the board voted on those circa 2022,
Yeah,
2023.
it was right around 2022.
That's when Neola phased out in Clark Hill.
Yeah, so that's why
policy.
I wanted to check on my phone. I was like, I'm 99% sure that's Neola's, if I remember, because I still
great, I'm glad you're here.
remember.
Those numbers.
Yeah, I remember. We work under both. We have clients that have other ones too, so got to know them all.
Appreciate that. The state laws that govern nonprofits, organizations, and their correlation, coordination with districts, is there anything in state law that mentions these types of relationships, not just federal law?
But yeah, there's state law. There is this. There's the Nonprofit Corporations Act and things that talk about giving what their ability to make donations to educational organizations, and they can do that. School districts also can accept those. So yeah, there's state law as well that deals with nonprofit corporations within the state. The big thing is a lot of the tax exempt comes from the federal side,
Right.
because that's the revenue code. But nonprofit corporations do have Michigan law that govern them, and there's nothing in there that would prohibit them from doing this as either. I'm looking for both sides of it.
Is any type of independent expenditure committee or some other political influence committee mentioned at all in that? So what I hear from you, Chairman, is it's not explicitly prohibited in the law, which
Yeah.
means that it's legal then
Yep.
by default. That doesn't necessarily make it right or correct. So I wonder if there is any clarity or guidance about how an independent expenditure committee is expected to behave in relation to state or governmental agencies.
Good question. I don't think there's anything like right on point on that. I think we sort of look at the things that go around. One thing could be conflict of interest is another thing that comes up. Board members have duties to the school district, same as administrators, and so there's rules with respect to conflict of interest. Like, for example, there's the contracts between public entities and Public Servants Act that requires if a board member has a conflict in a contract, or an administrator too. You can't have contracts with your employees outside of like an employment contract, sort of that self-dealing. And so they have to disclose that, and then they have to be recused, and they have to then vote on it without them. And also the school code under 1203 has a similar, just for board members, if the board member or their family member has an interest in a contract, or either is a party to a contract or has a financial interest in a contract or other financial situation, they have to disclose that and recuse themselves. So in terms of that, I think conflict of interest would be one that would address your particular issue, that would always need to be at the forefront to make sure that the board is, if they're voting to accept something, that if there were somebody that either has a legal conflict of interest where they couldn't accept it, or sometimes it's a perceived conflict. It just sort of doesn't seem right. They shouldn't be involved in it. Then they probably should have a discussion about whether or not they should be voting on it. So I think that's one. Now, with respect to looking at where the understanding the intent of the money, and if there's any restrictions to it, vetting those things out. And then just determining, is the organization doing something that otherwise seems to be, trying to otherwise either for the direct benefit of, an individual, that's always, we can't have that, or otherwise to, like I said, they're trying to influence the school district in any way. But, that's, then you have to really get sizable things And then revenue, the IRS would start getting involved at that side if they're starting to like venture into more of the political lobbying side for a school as opposed to just a true charitable donation for the educational purpose.
So what, in your estimation, what is sizable?
I wouldn't even guess. Like, it's the IRS, and it burns on it's the size of the company and what they're doing. You know, there's a lot of, you know, that's where, you know, I don't know what they would. I can look to see what they would think is sizable, but I wouldn't be able to
Five
figure out
figures,
what.
6 figures.
Yeah, it would probably have to be pretty big. You know, $1,000 or so is probably not going to cut it. But,
Yeah. Okay, and then, so what you described there is kind of where I landed in my own personal research on this, at least in terms of what I am expected to do as a board trustee, for sure. That the difference between a personal conflict of interest and kind of a perceived conflict of interest or reputational damage or credibility kind of difference. So I definitely ran across that. And then just today, as I revisited this, I came across the Michigan Public Purpose Doctrine. Is that related at all where public entities need to act, you know, for the public good? And does the mention of political interest come up in that doctrine?
Generally, no.
Okay.
So the public purpose doctrine is more like it's essentially like it's if you're doing something for the purpose at which you're established to pursue or take on. So school district be educating. There's lots of other things under the school code that school districts can do besides just educating children. They can do early childhood, they can do lifelong learning and things like that, but it's the educational component. So that's sort of the public purpose. So it would be, you know, the public purpose really would come in. It would be with respect to, you know, just vetting out any type of donor, whether it's a company or an individual that's donating money, is whether or not that they're giving that money for something that we should legitimately be doing. That's where I think that's going to come in. I don't think that it's going to be the one. It would be like more about that would probably come into play is like something that when we look at either contracts or actions or void for public policy, it's sort of like against, you know, what public policy would be. But the public purpose doctrine is, you know, for the benefit of operating the school.
Right. Schools should operate for the benefit of the public because we're a public school.
Correct.
It's not as much about coordination with other partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think that's clear.
So in the interest of time, I want to just get a sense of if either of you have interest in restricting either grant funds, solicitation, or gift acceptance by type of entity, or perhaps putting a cap on it before it comes to the board, or if we don't want to touch the policy and just eliminate grant repeated in 805.
I think putting a monetary amount on it is hard to do because that changes, right?
Yeah.
So we might say, oh, anything under $1,000 doesn't have to come to the board, but you have to revisit that every year, and we want to have policies that kind of stand the test of time, at least for a while. So I don't know that a monetary tag on this would be appropriate.
I personally, as a trustee, have I'm uncomfortable with the ethics of accepting funds from an independent expenditure committee. Mm-hmm. I think the policy is doesn't call it out explicitly, of course. Mm-hmm. State law, federal law doesn't call it out. It's clear that it is allowable. There is no rule that is going to point at it being incorrect, illegal, or any written clarity, for sure. And I looked as hard as I possibly could in every moment that I could. But I do believe that we are in a ethically gray area to the point where when I read policy 8.05 that authorizes the superintendent and I read 6.04 that authorizes the board to accept these, I think either the superintendent or the board would be in a vice between an ethically questionable acceptance of funds and a perfectly legitimate and publicly beneficial use, right? And I want to be clear in that difference. I think the example at hand with the parcels pool and transportation for kids to get those types lessons is absolutely in line with the mission of what we should do as a public school district. But I cannot personally resolve the impropriety of accepting funds from an organization that was created for political influence. When we talk about political influence and money changing hands, I do not believe that we should accept those. And I'm not sure the best way to write it into a policy, but I believe 100% in my core that there should be a barrier there between political action committees and accepting funds from in a public body.
Would it make sense to say that primarily political entities should not be solicited for grants or, and we should not accept gifts from them, to define it as political entities, or is that too vague still?
I think if that's a direction you want to go, I think, I'd have to think about it for a second. I think that's, you'll probably go that route, because I think if you said that they're, just to be honest, like if you said, well, for an entity that's primary purpose is political activity, well then that could, honestly, that could allow donations from a 501c4, because a 501c4 by law, it has to have its primary purpose of the civic, community benefit, social welfare side of it. But that's basically like 51%, 52%.
Sure.
So 48% could legitimately, under law, and they would still be operating within the federal laws and state laws as well, could have the political side. So then that's where it gets like dicey, because then if you really want to cut it up, like that's what the law says. So if they're 49% political stuff and 51 civic, social welfare, they would fit within it. So
Well, but that's their IRS designation, right? That's not something I guess my intention here is to make it clear for the administration so they don't have to be caught in the political discussions all the time of, oh, is this a political entity or is this an actual nonprofit? But if they're a 501c4, they would count there, if that's how we chose to define it.
Yeah.
Whereas a political action committee would be a primarily political organization. Or
political action committee is like that.
The Democrats Club would be a political
That
organization.
is a political action.
Yeah.
Or a political organization. So you could use political organization. That's more of a broader term under like the, or you could political entity or political organization. I think if you wanted to go that route, like you could put that in there.
Mm-hmm.
I could think about that what term would be best for that to try to, because with our policy, like we have flexibility. I don't want to like pigeonhole where you can't accept it from something because the definition says that when it's so.
That's why we're not settling on definite language tonight, because I think the administration and perhaps you will have to mull it over and realize, oh, that's going to exclude, some organization we didn't even think of that's actually primarily political but funds something.
I wouldn't want to parse between an independent expenditure committee is greater than 50% political and a 501c4 is 49% political. I think greater than 0% political means we should not accept funds from that organization. That is how I feel about it. I think mixing money and politics and public service is a bad idea.
We can definitely take
that's my personal opinion, just speaking to the group here.
I would worry that saying any political activity, that an organization that has any political activity could get more days, because like what if the Rotary Club wants to donate something, and the Rotary Club also supported, I guess I don't know, are they a 501c3? I think they are. That's something to look up. But
they're under one of the 501s.
Right.
C3, C4, C5.
I can never remember, but if it's something where, I heard one of their board members advocate for,
I think it has to be anchored in the definition of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we want to be parsing through IRS code every time
that's
it
where I
comes
want to
up,
stay,
right? So, to me, again, I think the simplest is greater than 0% political activity. We would respectfully decline, right? And I don't know that it's no collaboration, no way to partner with that organization at all. I would not say that. I think this particular policy about gifts and grants, these two policies, as it ends up as gifts and grants, to me, I think there should be a very clear demarcation, because anywhere else that I look, there is not a clear demarcation.
Okay.
So again, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next one, because the AI policy is also going to have a lot of discussion, and I don't want to keep our administrators too long. but I hope that Dr. Bishop and Dr. Tuttle will get back to us on what they think a definition would, which would not exclude too many organizations, but would maybe settle down some of the political discussions that I think have to get dragged into, is the idea. And if Mr. Rose has any further advice, we'd love to hear it.
Can I just add a comment too? I think there are other avenues for organizations to donate, and we have some very active groups within our community that are doing really good work.
That's
That
true.
there
They could
wouldn't
donate
be
to a
that
PTO.
question of, well, I mean, just that there's other organizations that, those organizations, I mean, I guess you're burying it, but like, and I don't want to name things, but like we have organizations that accept donations, and then those would be a way to funnel that to the school district from an organization that might be more acceptable.
That's also something to consider. So the policy discussion on AI, Dr. Bishop and I talked about how to bring this to the policy committee and the board, because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of things changing with AI, and we don't want to get too in the weeds about how teachers should be using it, how they should, but the idea of students using it and how teachers should discipline, potential plagiarism issues and everything is more of it might come to the board as a policy, but I don't know if that's a policy committee discussion, because that's more of an administrative thing. We don't want to be micromanaging how teachers, how we expect students to use certain technology, but where I think it's appropriate for the policy committee and ultimately the board to discuss specifics is about student safety, specifically with some of the deep fakes and FERPA implications that come into AI usage. So I don't know if you have anything else.
Absolutely, no, I appreciate the intro into the AI conversation. Just to go back to item 2.1 for a second, I talked to Ms. Fanning via text.
Oh.
The app is not live yet.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure
So I
everybody
know
has
how
that
it is.
information. But going back to the AI policy, this is actually a really great conversation I was able to have with students. And I think it's a lot of times we kind of forget about that student voice sometimes, and we need to think about it more and more. So I had a chance to talk with students at both high schools about AI, about how they're utilizing it, how we're stretching their thinking, and how there's some drawbacks to it. And we've also had a chance to talk to teachers as well, and I think it's important for them, even whatever we do decide here at a policy committee, we also take it back to them for feedback, because they're the one who is in the day-to-day operations as it relates to AI policies. But when it comes to AI policy, we do want to stay in the student safety realm. We know AI is continuing to grow, and we don't want to have to continue to revisit any type of policy that we have every week based upon what new piece of technology comes out. So I just want to make sure that we all had a clear delineation that whatever is in this AI policy, there will be administrative guidelines that will go and bring some consistency to what we do at buildings, which is definitely needed with some of the guidelines that we've been having, and we've been having some conversations with our teachers about that. But there's also a code of conduct that still exists beyond this policy. So within this policy, it's not going to reference as much, it's a sample policy that Clark Hill has drawn up for us. But outside of this, there still is our student code of conduct. So when someone does something that goes against our student code of conduct, whether it's technology or not, they're still subjected to that. So I don't think we need to draw everything out of this AI policy to say, hey, if you create this or you do this, this is what the consequence would be. That already still exists. So prime example, if somebody uses AI for cheating or for plagiarism, that's already, as far as a series of consequences, what it could be in our student code of conduct, that's already there. So we don't need to put that in here. Does that make sense? And Jeremy, I don't know if you wanted to be able to speak to as far as some of the other things that we've talked about, as far as some of the things we got from board members, from parents, or just overall what you see across the state as it relates to AI policies. But I know we talked about student safety being our main priority.
Yeah, there was a couple of other things I'd add. So like the sample that we started off with was really focused on what students can use AI for and what they can't. So like saying, hey, this is what board, we have our directive, sort of those wide guardrails saying this is what we would feel is what we could use AI for, what we can't. We could also add into there like what teachers or administrators and staff, we could say this is what they can and can't do, and you could get that down into, and then obviously then teachers would be another one. But we just started with the students because that's what we were focused on, and really then allowing the building level. So other things that you would look at is, a lot of like everybody calls them acceptable use policies, but I know policy thinks it's a board policy, but it's like acceptable use agreement, and those are things that the administration could change every year. So as AI evolves, which it's continuing to do almost daily now, is every year there can be it could maybe, oh, there's a new type of AI, and we can put that in the acceptable use agreement that students sign every year as part of the student code of conduct, what they can and can't use, AI for. Also at the building level, so teachers are consistently from plagiarism side, as they're saying, okay, well, you used AI incorrectly, which is then deemed plagiarism. So one teacher isn't saying, well, this is plagiarism, but the other teacher is saying, well, that's not plagiarism. It may be two different students used AI in the exact same way, but you're getting different results. So, but from the standpoint, otherwise, you have student safety is, a lot of times it's AI at the building level, but that's really when you're looking at maybe an outside contractor assisting the district doing something, and then having contractual language of what they can and can't use AI for that might somehow compromise the student data that they could or could not have access to as part of the services they're providing. So you would look at that in doing contracts in that language. So you might not necessarily put that in a policy, but those are things. But with student safety is obviously one is where is their data going and who has access to it, and what to what extent is AI doing. So we could, parameters is, teachers, staff can't put student data into AI models to do anything because that could otherwise be disclosed outside of the FERPA world. So those are really the main things. Is there's lots of other things below the actual policy that you can use to protect and direct what AI is used for or can't be used for.
My first question, hopefully not too many, but my first question is, in the student policy or the student-centered piece of the policy here, it's clear that we want to augment the student's ability to create and show their mastery of the content, right? And I think I really like Dr. Tuttle's analogy with a calculator, right? So calculator didn't ruin math class forever, right? So it's totally understandable. However, right, you have to teach the kids actually how to use the calculator so that tool can be used pretty equitably across your whole classroom. And right now, I think in terms of AI and acceptance and adoption within our society, certainly at least locally here, some kids can probably dance circles around any one of us in terms of these tools, but I think the median student maybe is just as blind as you or me or somebody else. And so I think a policy that governs what a student can and cannot do needs to pair with some level of structure into how we're going to teach students to use it so that everybody is getting the benefit of this particular tool that we are enabling the use of. Again, I don't expect that to come out of snapping fingers, but I think it's important, right? That once calculators were accepted in math class, schools had to buy enough calculators that every kid could have one and use it, right? So I think that there's a little bit of an equity piece to that. And then the last piece, which is more for our council here, is when we're talking about cheating or academic honesty or dishonesty with what a student creates, right? I think of kind of what's it called when you create something and you own the right to that thing? Copyright and there's
Intellectual property?
Intellectual property.
Intellectual
That's what IP, right?
IP.
So, is there any direction or guidance on these outputs of AI and that IP, so to speak? If it were to be a money-making endeavor, does the person who created the prompts and put them in have the IP? And then how do we relate that then to a student context? So this student's not making money on it, but they are making grades on it, I guess, for lack of better terms. Is there guidance there that maybe belongs in parallel or not? Maybe not, because I don't think our legislators are really on top of this either. But
They're not. They're even older than us.
to me, the concept is somewhat, at least as a starting point, intellectual property seems like what we're trying to govern here from the student. Did they do it?
Yeah,
Right,
and I think that's something that students often misunderstand too, because they think, well, I put the prompts in, so it's mine, and that's something artists have had the issue with too. Well, I prompted the AI and told it exactly what I wanted it to, what kind of picture I wanted, so that picture's not mine, but it isn't. And all of the OpenAI that I've worked with, all the OpenAI that I've worked with in one of my jobs has had specific terms of use that say everything that you create is ours. Every prompt you put in now belongs to us. And to that end, I do want to have something in the administrative guidelines that staff shall not direct students to enter personally identifiable information or photos into any open AI models, because I think a lot of adults and anyone older than me is not realizing that that is a FERPA violation, because you're giving that information to an open AI source that can now use, and especially with the deepfake photos that we're seeing everywhere on the internet now, it's a big concern, and some parents would be horrified to know that their kids have been told to go into ChatGPT, put in their photo to make yourself look like a Revolutionary War hero, and then write a story about it. And it's just supposed to be fun. I understand it's not malicious, but they're not understanding how that you put that child's photo into the public domain, essentially. Except it's not even public; it's owned by a corporation. So those kinds of things. The IP, these OpenAI sources are very clear that it's all theirs. The prompts, the resulting output, every conversation you have with them, it belongs to them. So, and I think our students don't always understand that when they're presenting it as if it's their own work.
Well, I think that pairs with having a curriculum piece, right? Like it goes along with understanding the use and how to use it effectively to do what you want to do, but also safely. And that might be something we need to look at as a curriculum piece that we have students go through yearly, or just some small part of it, but that informs so that they understand what intellectual property is and how to use it effectively.
In all fairness, too, we probably need to make sure that we're focusing on some type of professional development that will allow and support teachers. That way they have the knowledge and awareness when they're speaking to their students about this, because it is growing, right? So making sure even access within students, access within teachers, that they all have that foundational level of what is there. That way they can talk to their students about that is also important. We want to set them up for success, too.
Having some common language, not to dictate that and limit it, but just to make it so that the understanding is there when they go from grade to grade or building to building, how that looks. And that's not something that we would dictate, but just having that as piece of the professional development and education for our kids.
My last tie, in the second bullet under a student may use Gen AI, second bullet, when the student properly attributes credit to the source, right? And that, I think that's the source is like these huge large language models that ingested, essentially the entire internet worth of data. How do you properly source not ChatGPT for spitting it to you, but who actually created that? So if I say, take this piece of text and put it in the style of, some famous author, right? Who should I be citing? Not ChatGPT, but probably the muse or the style or whatever. And I don't have the right answer, but I think there should be some augmentation there so that we understand who we are sourcing and how this particular tool can read all of that and bring it back to you as a tool effectively, and that's great. But we are trying to get to the primary source. And I know our secondary level students really talk about primary and tertiary sources and resources and research papers and that kind of thing. But I think from a very young level, they need to understand that there was a lot of input that led to this tool, and that is who we need to give credit to, is the people that created that input.
Some of that's like back to the curriculum, instructing the kids how to use it. Like I'm not familiar with all the AI tools, but I've played around with several of them. Just as they've come up, and like ChatGPT, each of the statements as it's going through often has a link to it. You can click on this. It looks like a little like chain link thing. You hit that, and then it'll pop up the source that it's pulled that information from, and then it basically summarizes it. It's like an aggregator of information. So it's really teaching the kids, hey, this sentence says this, but then you have to click on this link, and that's where the source is. Then you need to go back and look at the source, and that could be, I've found multiple times where put ChatGPT is said, and they put the source there. So let's click it, and then the source doesn't say that. So it's like, how did
they hallucinate references.
Yeah, it's like how did So that's where it creates a challenge. I think on all this is these are great issues, and it's teaching the kids how to effectively use it, and then attributing credit to where it needs to be on the right source.
But I think we're also talking about that pre-K through 12th grade alignment too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Making sure like every step of the way they're learning more and more about it, which is important.
Yeah.
You know,
Foundational pieces.
yeah, that they're having it that way. But also, even within our students, talking to them like AI is not the end result, right? There's so much critical thinking that needs to go into what you're putting in, critical thinking about what it's spitting out, because it's not always factual. Having to double check those and those skills have to be developed along the way. It can't just be you take whatever you get out of that, you know what I mean, out of Gemini or Chat or whatever else you're utilizing and say it or use it for face value.
So do we want the draft form of AI policy incorporated into our academic honesty administrative guidelines? Is that something we want to consider anyway?
I think that makes sense. What do you guys think?
Is that where it would
YouTube
belong, do you
guys?
think,
What
the
do you
AG?
think as?
I think probably a standalone policy.
Yeah, I think it would go as its own policy, and then there could be administrative guidelines that go deeper down into it. And we can expand and we can add some information around, teachers and staff and general things, which is more of a student, we can expand. We started just with the students on the sample we came up with. And then that was just a standalone policy. And then again, I always use guardrails. And these are the guardrails of the board. And then the administrative guidelines, acceptable use agreements in student code of conduct, it would get granular as you go further down into those.
Only thing I would like about like a little bit of leeway so I can go back to students and back to teachers, and even with this sample policy,
Yes.
what could be incorporated, what some things you think about within this, because like I just want to make sure we understand that they're at the ground level. So I want to make sure that we not only have buy-in, we have input for them, because if not, we could be doing something that could be negatively impacting the educational experience if we don't get their input. So I just want to have that latitude.
I think we maximize the value of putting this into place if we can get to a deeper conversation than how are the kids going to cheat with this particular tool, right? And really that's on us to kind of probe for that depth, I hope.
So beyond the fear conversation.
Yeah.
Like how can you use it to stretch somebody's thinking? How can you utilize it to help them?
What framework are we responsible to create so they can maximize the power of the tool? Not how can we catch them cheating, right?
It's not punitive.
Right.
It's,
You can write the same policy from those two different perspectives for sure. And I
There's
hope that
generative
we're
AI
creating.
versus just
Right.
research AI.
revision. Yeah.
Right.
There
There should be consequences if somebody is trying to take shortcuts, etc., not doing the honest thing, sure, right? But that's not the focus. The focus is how do we empower kids to maximize this tool.
So Dr. Bishop, I know you've already spoken with the students, and I assume that you would be tasked with speaking with those groups again, the students and the staff. If we have our next policy meeting on March 2nd, would that give you enough time to get feedback on the draft policy?
For sure. All I want to do is I want to take the input that they've given me now. So this is a sample policy that Clark Hill has given us. Try to work some of those things in, take it back to them so they can look at it, see, make sure their words are represented appropriately, and then bring it back to the committee. So March 2nd is fine.
Okay, would that work for both of you?
That sounds great.
Okay.
So as far as you know, no district conflicts March 2nd?
No, as long as he's good with that. He's in charge of this committee.
I'm gonna double check
Right,
March
'cause
2nd.
we had wanted to do one in February, but couldn't find a date that wasn't already a board meeting or some other.
We'll take the break.
Second.
We'll take the week off.
Well,
It's
and
okay.
and it gives Dr. Bishop time to really get some good feedback on this, because I think it's very important that we have
It's a
one.
Monday.
I'm saying, going through my head, that would be a Monday.
And Monday, I don't see a board meeting that day, so that's okay.
And up to you if you want legal counsel there. I don't know that it's strictly necessary, but if you're more comfortable, that's fine.
For sure. Well, I guess once we develop the agenda and I send out items we need to discuss, you also can let me know as far as a committee if you feel like Jeremy needs to be here. Not that we don't like you to be here.
Very much appreciate your input, but
Well, we also
just
want
always
to
trying to save costs.
Effective use of resources, so.
For sure.
If you say no, it's not going to hurt my feelings.
All right. Any other input before Dr. Bishop takes that back to this focus groups?
It's a lot. I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to consider, and I don't even know if at the next policy meeting we'll have a definite policy to bring to the board, because there's a lot of workshopping, a lot of things that will probably pop up in the next month.
I got it.
Okay, sure.
And
We'll try.
I think yes, some pieces will be done, but I think also it's important for us to kind of like map out a plan. right here is like a plan of action in which we're going to be able to do, because it's going to take a lot more conversations. We got to talk to Dr. Delgado about, okay, what does potentially PD look like?
Right.
Then we got to talk to the union. What are you hearing, right? So like I think as long as we have like a plan with like some timeline things, I'd like to better bring that back, because it's just going to take more than a month to be able to get some of those things and to find credible people to come and do PD. And when can they, like, it's going to take a little bit more time for us on some of the other things, but we can get some of the basic things down.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring that back to you on March 2nd.
Sounds great. We really appreciate your work and especially talking to the students about what they need.
That was the fun part.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go back to them. Like, anytime I can start talking to more kids, like, let's do it.
I bet they have all kinds of opinions.
Yeah.
Oh, they do.
You show me. You show me how to do it.
They do. I loved it. I loved it.
All right, so we are at the public comment portion of the meeting. Any public commenters should stand and state their name, and they will have 3 minutes. Just whenever. Nope. Okay. We're casual here at the committee meeting, so last call. No. All right. Committee member comments. President Derringer, any last?
Well, thank you,
comments?
everybody. That's some fascinating conversation, right? And appreciate everybody pulling in the same direction, as I've found myself saying a few times since the new year.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to be sitting here and doing work with the whole team and feel like we're pulling in the same direction. So thank you, everybody, for that. And looking forward to getting back into this stuff. It's fun.
No comments other than stay warm.
Stay warm, especially on Friday.
Stay warm at
Yes,
home.
thank you to my 2 fellow trustees for making the time to be here and having substantive thoughts on the policies. I know it's a lot to digest, and even though it was only 3 items, it was a lot to consider. So I appreciate your time and homework on this, and thanks to our administration for getting these drafts ready and letting us know your feedback, and we look forward to more feedback. And thank you, Mr. Motz, for your guidance, because it's very necessary sometimes.
Appreciate it. Glad to help.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Motz, thank you so much for your knowledge this afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to connect with students around something that really contributes to their educational progress. So I'll just would challenge us to do that more and more, find ways in which we can incorporate students into our day-to-day activities and what we do, because this is kind of like why we're not kind of, it is why we are here. So thanks for that opportunity.
I'm all set.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, we are adjourned.